On a cold, gray morning in a quiet southern town, an elderly black woman stood at the edge of a dusty road, clutching her worn purse and a single $5 bill. Her clothes spoke of struggle, but her eyes carried warmth, the kind that comes from a lifetime of giving more than she had. When a line of roaring motorcycles passed by, few would have guessed that within hours, her small act of kindness toward one stranded biker would ripple into something extraordinary. By the next sunrise, 80 leather-clad riders would thunder back into her life, not for trouble, but to change it forever. Mary Jenkins had lived in the same small, time-worn house for nearly 50 years, a creaky old home sitting at the edge of a forgotten town where opportunity rarely stopped anymore. Her porch, lined with cracked paint and faded flower pots, faced a road that saw more dust than visitors. Every morning, she'd step outside with her cup of instant coffee, watching the world go by in slow motion. She was 73, a retired school cafeteria worker who'd stretched every dollar since her husband passed. Her Social Security check barely covered the bills, and yet she always found a way to help someone else. Neighbors often shook their heads when they saw her feeding stray dogs or slipping a few dollars into a struggling child's backpack. Still, Mary didn't see herself as generous, just grateful. It was late fall when the moment that would change everything began. The air carried the sharp bite of approaching winter, and Mary was on her way home from the local grocery store. Her cart held only a few essentials, bread, milk, and a small bag of rice, totaling just over $15. As she crossed the parking lot, she noticed a large man in a biker jacket standing beside a broken-down motorcycle. He looked frustrated, cold, and out of place. People walked past him without a glance, their eyes fixed on their own worries. But something in Mary's heart pulled her closer. Maybe it was the memory of her husband, who once rode a motorcycle himself, or perhaps it was that deep, unspoken belief she'd carried all her life. That kindness, no matter how small, always finds its way back. That belief was about to be tested in ways she could never imagine. Mary hesitated for a moment, clutching her grocery bag a little tighter. The man beside the motorcycle was tall, his hands stained with grease, a heavy chain glinting from his jacket. His bike leaned awkwardly on the curb, steam curling from the engine. She could tell he'd been there a while, the kind of pride that doesn't let you ask for help with. She walked up slowly, her voice soft but steady. "You all right, son?" she asked. The man nodded, not meeting her eyes. He said he'd run out of gas and was waiting for a friend who hadn't shown. Mary could hear the embarrassment in his tone. She looked down at the few dollars she had left after paying for groceries, barely enough for bus fare home. But compassion outweighed caution. She opened her purse and handed him the last of her money, a crumpled $5 and a few coins. "It ain't much," she said, "but it'll get you where you need to go." The man tried to refuse, but she insisted, smiling through the chill that bit at her fingers. "Just promise you'll pass it on someday," she whispered before walking away. He watched her go, stunned by the simple act. That night, Mary went home to an empty house, her stomach rumbling, but her heart at peace. She didn't know the man's name, and she didn't expect to see him again. For her, kindness was never an investment. It was a calling. But miles away, that same biker, whose name was Rick, couldn't shake her image from his mind. Toughened by years on the road, he wasn't used to being helped, especially not by someone who clearly had so little. He told his riding group, a close-knit brotherhood of veterans and working-class men, about the older woman who'd given her last few dollars to a stranger without hesitation. What started as a simple story over beers grew into something much bigger. The group dug deeper and found out who she was. They learned that her house's roof leaked whenever it rained, that her heating barely worked, and that she spent winters wrapped in blankets to save on electricity. A plan began to form. Quietly, the bikers organized a ride. Not one or two, but a whole convoy. They reached out to local stores, mechanics, and neighbors. Word spread like wildfire through the biker community, gathering momentum with every message shared. By the end of the week, more than 80 riders had pledged to join. They weren't coming for charity. They were coming to honor a woman whose heart had outgrown her circumstances. Meanwhile, Mary carried on with her days, unaware of the storm of kindness building on the horizon. She fixed a loose window frame, fed the stray cats that lingered near her porch, and stretched her last can of soup for another dinner. She had no idea that the same road where she'd once offered help to a stranded man was about to fill with the thunder of engines. Not in anger, but in gratitude. Something extraordinary was on its way to her quiet, tiny home. It was a Saturday morning when the ground began to tremble beneath Mary's old porch. At first, she thought it was a storm rolling in, the kind that carried wind and rain through the hollows of the town. But as she stepped outside, mug in hand, the sound grew louder, heavier, alive. Down the road, one by one, motorcycles began to appear. Then dozens more. The sun glinted off chrome and leather as an endless line of riders stretched beyond what her eyes could count. 80 in total, their engines humming in perfect harmony. The neighbors peeked through the curtains, unsure whether to be frightened or amazed. At the front of the pack was Rick, the same man she'd helped days earlier. He dismounted his bike and walked up her front yard, his boots crunching on gravel. Mary froze, her breath caught in her throat. She recognized him instantly, but she couldn't imagine why he was here, or why he wasn't alone. Without a word, Rick nodded toward the line of trucks that followed the riders. Out came men and women carrying boxes, ladders, paint cans, and new shingles. Others rolled out tools, lumber, and even furniture. One of them gently placed a brand-new heater on her porch. Tears welled in Mary's eyes as she tried to speak, but her voice faltered. Rick finally broke the silence, his tone thick with emotion. "Ma'am, you gave me your last few dollars when you didn't have to. We just figured it's our turn to give back." The riders erupted in applause, a thunderous roar of joy and unity. Mary covered her face with trembling hands, overwhelmed. In that moment, decades of struggle, loneliness, and quiet resilience came crashing into a single realization. She was seen. She was valued. For hours, the bikers worked, repairing her roof, repainting her walls, and restocking her pantry. Children from the neighborhood joined in, carrying supplies and cheering as the little house transformed. As the sun dipped behind the trees, Mary stood among them, surrounded by laughter, noise, and the rumble of engines. The same sound once symbolized distance and danger, now echoing as the heartbeat of hope. By sundown, the once faded house on Maple Street gleamed like it hadn't in decades. Fresh paint glowed under the golden light, a new roof sealed out the chill, and the steady hum of a working heater drifted through the walls. The bikers had done more than fix a home. They'd restored a life that the world had quietly overlooked. Mary stood at the edge of her porch, clutching the small photo of her late husband that had hung crooked on her wall for years. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "He would have loved this." Around her, the riders smiled, some wiping their eyes behind sunglasses. They hadn't come for praise, and they didn't leave business cards or names. They came as one, a brotherhood of strangers bound by a single act of kindness. When the last motorcycle rumbled away, the quiet returned. But it wasn't as quiet as before. The air felt lighter, alive with something sacred. That night, as Mary sat by the glow of her new heater, she opened a handwritten note Rick had left behind. "You reminded us what it means to be human. One act can change everything." She pressed the paper to her chest and smiled through her tears. For the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. News of the story spread through the town and beyond. People who had once looked past Mary now stopped to check on her, bring her food, or say hello. And across social media, the video of 80 riders rebuilding an elderly black woman's home went viral, not because of charity, but because it reminded people that compassion knows no color, no class, no boundaries. Weeks later, Mary sat on her newly repaired porch watching the sunset. A child from down the street waved as he rode past on his bike. She waved back, whispering to herself, "Maybe kindness really does come back home." And as the last rays of light touched her face, she smiled, not because her life had changed, but because she had proven something far greater. Even in a world divided by race and circumstance, One small act of love can still bring us all together. What if everyone chose to give, even when they had nothing left?